First, I'd like to just introduce myself. Okay, let's see. Hold on, we have a pop-up here. Okay. All right, my name is Adam Basiliga. I am the co-owner of Bedrock Technology. We are a local IT service provider in the northeastern Pennsylvania region. I've been working in information technology since the mid to late 90s. I think I started in 1997. So I've seen, everything. I think we were Windows 95 and dial-up internet were the prime technologies back then. And then later in my career, in 2003, I believe it was, I started working at a local healthcare provider. I eventually became the CIO of that healthcare organization, and I think we grew, up to around 350 employees when I departed in 2014. Bedrock Technology was a product of a lot of demand that we saw coming out of the healthcare industry, especially around compliance and electronic medical records. So my business partner and I, saw that opportunity and decided to branch out on our own. And since then we've not only worked with a lot of the healthcare industry, but we've branched out into many other verticals, retail, construction, financial. We've worked with a lot of different organizations now, and we're fortunate because we get to see lots of different perspectives around technology. And you would think that there's businesses out there that you would never imagine that would be so dependent on technology, and they are, things that don't seem very related or would have dependence. So, it's pretty much ingrained in everything we do now. And, unfortunately, what we're dealing with, especially since COVID, is an increase in cybersecurity incidents, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'd like to, give a high-level overview, give some statistics, talk about what we're seeing in the industry, talk about insurance a little bit, some challenges we're seeing there, and then I'd like to give some high-level advice, and then I'd also like to dig into some practical things that everyone can take back to their businesses and hopefully lower their risk profile a little bit. So let's move on. So let's talk about the problem first off. So when it comes to cybersecurity, like I said, especially since COVID, the threats are becoming more advanced. And what I mean by that is that back in the day, like if we went back 10 or 15 years ago, you'd get a piece of malware, you'd have some pop-up advertisements, you'd call your technician in, they'd come in, clean out the infection, and you'd go back to work, and there wasn't, the types of issues we're dealing with now. Now we're dealing with ransomware payments, we're dealing with breaches of sensitive information. The liability is increasing every year. And we have to realize that this is a multi-billion-dollar industry now. We're not dealing with lone actors, we're dealing with well-organized organizations, groups of ransomware networks that they actually share, information with each other. They're coordinated, they have roles and responsibilities, and, their basically sole mission is out there to, hack your businesses and hopefully extract money from them. So, problem with small and medium business especially is that they don't have the resources or knowledge internally in most cases to effectively manage the risk posed by these threats. That has obvious impact to being able to protect ourselves from these things. The potential consequences to failure in protecting your business from these threats is significant. I just heard a statistic yesterday that the average cost of a ransomware event now is around $200,000. So I'm not sure how many businesses in northeastern Pennsylvania can protect themselves and weather a $200,000 event without appropriate insurance protection. And even with that insurance, the loss of revenue, the impact to reputation, it's nothing that anyone really wants to go through. So, you know, hopefully what I talk about today will, you know, help you ask the right questions around how can I not only prevent this, but if I do have an incident, how do I handle that incident appropriately? So I was trying to figure out if there's a way to do a poll, but just for those attending, could you maybe put in the chat there, how many of you out there have a cyber insurance policy, or are you looking for a cyber insurance policy, or you don't, you know, you didn't know that you needed a cyber insurance policy? Curious to see where we're at, because I know that, okay, I'm not here to learn, good. Good, good. Yeah, I mean, I think we see, you know, under 50% of, you know, businesses that we pull on this typically don't have you know, cyber insurance. So it's not a, you know, I wish it was more common for businesses to have insurance, but unfortunately, we're not seeing that. So hopefully, you know, what we talk about here will help bring those numbers up a little bit. All right, so I want to talk about some common terms that we use in security. So I want to differentiate. A lot of times you hear the words incident and you hear the words breach, and I want to talk about the differences between those two words because there are important distinctions between the two. When we talk about an incident, it's any security event that can cause an impact to an organization, but it necessarily doesn't mean that it's a breach of information. So you could have what they call a denial of service attack, where someone floods your internet connection with traffic and it brings your business to a halt and you can't work, but you're not necessarily losing any of your information, either your internal you know, employee information or your customers' information, but it can, you know, cause a significant impact to your operations. Now, a breach is an incident plus loss of information. That's things like ransomware attacks. That's things where you have a compromise of your internal systems and there's been some leakage of the information that you're holding dear. So another term that we hear is threat actor. Now, who's behind a security incident? Now, this can be an internal employee, either malicious or non-malicious. So, you know, a non-malicious, you know, incident can be an employee left a laptop on the seat of their car, someone smashed the window and grabbed it, and it had a bunch of data on it and it wasn't encrypted. Now, it can be a situation where a non-malicious activity from an internal employee can help a malicious actor from the outside in the door, and that's something like a phishing, you know, campaign where you get an email, you click on a link. And I think Victoria, right before we got on the call, she got an email from a bank, and she said, you know, I just got this email coincidentally, and you know, it looks suspicious, and you know, it's either a highly well, you know, branded email because it's actually coming from a legitimate looking domain name, or it's, you know, maybe a phishing campaign test. But she was not expecting that email. So I said, well, if you didn't request, you know, that email, or you're not expecting that email from them, I would ignore it because, you know, if you're not anticipating that email, what's the sense of opening it if, you know, if you know, if there's a chance that it could be something malicious. So an external threat actor, now I know I mentioned this earlier, but this doesn't necessarily mean, you know, there's always a stereotype of an external hacker, and everyone, I think, has this idea in their head that there's this, you know, hooded, you know, teenage hacker in their parents' basement, and, you know, that's who's compromising, you know, all of these networks. And that's, you know, that's I think, an invalid stereotype. We have to, you know, we have to realize that these are, again, highly organized, you know, organized crime networks, and they're well trained at doing this stuff. They're methodical, and a lot of their attack methods are very unsophisticated. So, you know, the majority of things, they're not coming in through zero zero-day bugs in software. They're doing phishing campaigns, they're doing low-level, low sophistication attacks, and they're just working on volume. So once they have an edge into a network, then the more sophisticated work of moving laterally and trying to work their way inside of a network that begins. So I want to talk about some statistics around the cybercrime in the last couple of years. So the FBI has a department that they call the Internet Crime Complaint Center, and every year they release an annual report, and it talks about both the number of complaints and what the financial losses were around those complaints. And the statistics are kind of mind-numbing. I think over the last 5 years, they've basically increased every single year, and especially in the last 2 years since we've had COVID. When everyone moved over to a remote work from home scenario, a lot of things were put together, last minute, and there wasn't a lot of thought put around the security of them, and these threat actors have taken advantage of that. So I mean, the number of reported complaints, from 2019 just to 2021 increased over 81%. And the financial losses nearly doubled to around $6.9 billion in 2021. So, I mean, it's a big industry, and it's something that we can't really ignore. So, obviously with all these financial losses, the insurance industry, I think was somewhat caught off guard. They really weren't anticipating the level of risk that they were assuming by writing policies against this. So, in the last year or two, I've seen cyber insurance premiums, double. Coverages have gone in half. The list of requirements during renewals every year has gotten increasingly stringent. Some carriers have just gotten out of the business completely. So, I mean, it's something that, I feel that there's going to have to be some sort of, government intervention at some point. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing it more look like an auto insurance industry where, you have safe driver riders and things like that, where, as long as you can demonstrate that you're practicing good security hygiene in your company, that you'll get a better premium. But, we've seen, this is a big challenge. In addition to all of that, the IT and cybersecurity staffing shortages have been significant as well. I think this ISC2, which tracks the cybersecurity industry, is showing a global shortage of around 2.72 million professionals in cybersecurity. So, both the financial impact to an incident, the insurance costs, and the lack of professionals to help make the situation better is making for a horrible recipe, for the small, medium business market. So this report here I like to show because it comes from a Verizon report that they release every year around data breaches, and obviously external organized crime networks with a financial motive are the #1 threat actor that we're dealing with. And if you have, I have some links at the end of this presentation. I encourage you to pull these up if you have a few extra minutes and just browse through some of the statistics, because they cover a lot of industries. So, if you, can align what types of threat actors are targeting your specific industries, you can help design your defenses around those sorts of threat actors. So it's not it's not spray and pray approach, but you can sort of go after your biggest areas of vulnerability. So this also comes from the Verizon report. These are tactics used, and each side of this chart differentiates between data breaches, where there's actually that loss of sensitive information, and then on the right-hand side you have patterns of incidents, which aren't necessarily losses of information. So, like I said, denial of service attack #1, because it's the easiest thing to pull off. You don't need any special access to the victim's networks. You can just find your target and start blasting them with traffic. So that's obviously the #1. And then on the breach side, social engineering, that's your phishing campaigns, You know, your people are often your weakest link when it comes to your defenses. You could have the biggest defense mechanism at your front door, but if someone lets them in the back door, obviously all of those other protections are for naught. So I want to talk a little bit about perspective, because I think, you know, when it comes to asking the right questions, I think, you know, this is very important to talk about. So I've seen a couple different perspectives when it comes to security, and this is what I think is the wrong perspective. So I've got antivirus on my PC, and when I log into my email, I need to type that 6-digit code in. I pay someone to install updates, and I do backups. And I assume that they do a good job because I pay them a lot of money, so I'm covered, right? And we see this all too frequently. This is a very head in the sand mentality. And, you know, coming from a vendor perspective, you know, we work with small and medium businesses. We deliver, you know, help desk support. We deliver all these patching, you know, systems, the backups. But this is a two-way street, and it requires both business leaders and executives and leadership on the business side, as well as us, to deliver a comprehensive solution to this, because we can't, you know, possibly, protect 100% every single aspect that could happen. So the business also has to be interested in their own survival in this environment. This is what I think is the right perspective. I assume that it's not a matter of if, but when my organization faces a security incident, I should assume that our network and systems have been compromised and be prepared to detect, respond, and recover accordingly. I realize that even with professional help, as a business leader, I must understand the potential risk facing my organization and ensure we are prepared to defend and respond if necessary. And I think of this a lot like an analogy I can use is, homeowners insurance and having fire coverage. You know, just because you haven't had a fire in your home in the last 20 years does not mean that you're immune from a fire. And you always want to be prepared. You want to have fire extinguishers. You want to have smoke detectors to detect if you have a fire. And, you know, you want to have that insurance policy there for if you have a significant fire and your house burns down. So a lot of times, for whatever reason, you know, we don't think about IT security in this way. We think about protecting ourselves and defending, but we don't really put a lot of effort into doing the what ifs. What if this does happen? What if I walk in the morning and none of my systems are accessible? You know, who do I call? You know, you don't want to figure that out when you're in the middle of a fire. Okay, so you say, okay, well, that's great. My perspective changed. Now what, this sounds, you know, really hard, and it is. I don't want to downplay this. This is not something that there's a silver bullet for. You can't buy your way out of this. It requires a layered approach, and there's many different aspects of this. So one of the high-level things I'd like to point out is that there's a government agency called the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And what they did back in 2014 is they realized that this is going to become an increasing problem for the small and medium business community. And really they realized that, especially in a global economy, there's really not many businesses that are non-essential, right? I know we talked about essential and non-essential businesses during COVID, but, you know, with the way supply chain works, like, I can't think of many businesses that, if they go out of existence, that they don't have some impact on our economy, on delivering materials. I know with material shortages now, we realize how crucial all these supply chains are. So, you know, it's in our national interest that as individual organizations that we pay attention to this, and we raise our education and our ability to withstand some of these attacks. So what the National Institute of Standards and Technology did in 2014 is to release a framework. And what this framework does is it outlines 5 different, what they call functions. And these are related to both the prevention and defense, as well as the response to security incidents. So what I like about this is it gives you a set of boundaries and lines that allow you to ask the right questions. And, you know, because a lot of times you can ask 10 different experts, you know, what they should do around cybersecurity, and you're going to get 10 different answers. So this framework, I believe, gives you a very well thought out, organized framework to ask the right questions. So I wanted to just briefly cover these five functions within the the cybersecurity framework. And I'm going to start with the one I think we focus on the most as organizations, and that is protect. Okay, so this is all of the tools and technologies and processes and procedures around protecting your assets. And when I say assets, I mean your computers, your data, your network, your applications, your people. So these are all the things to keep the bad guys out. I think this by far is where everyone puts all their money into and just hopes that it is they're doing the right thing and that they don't have an incident. So beyond that, I want to back up to this identify function. I think this is where we do it. Sometimes we do an okay job with, but I feel that as small and medium businesses especially, there's a lot of gaps in this area. And some of the things in here are, based around knowing what you have, because if you don't know exactly what you have or how important it is, you can't really design your protections around, how to adequately defend against threats to these assets. So this is really, I think we do a decent job at knowing what hardware we have, what computers do you have? We make a spreadsheet and we say, okay, here's all the computers in my organization. And that's about where I see most companies stop. What's also important to do is inventory your software, right? Know exactly what applications your business is depending on, and know where the data that those applications uses is stored. That's very important because you have to understand if there's a potential avenue to exposure of that data. And then, lastly, inventorying your people is actually something that's, very important. Knowing what accesses and permissions that different roles in your organization should have, and making sure that they are aligned with the controls in your technology. So that means, the receptionist at the front desk should not have the same access as, the executive that has, almost full access to the, to either file shares or your SharePoint site, your internal system. So, I would say, if you think your protection is pretty, in a pretty good spot, I would go back to this identify and put some more work into figuring out what it is exactly that you have and what you want to protect. So then this next function is detect. Okay, I thought I had good protection, but something got by, and how do I know when something got by? So this, relies on some technologies that you can use to monitor, the event logs in your systems. You really don't, if you can catch an incident before someone, calls you up and says, hey, I've got this message on my screen, it's good to have some systems out there that are collecting, logs from your network devices, your servers, your workstations, and they've put a lot of work into this in the last 5 years. There's a lot of more intelligence around these systems now, and they've come a long way to detecting anomalies. But this is also useful. A lot of these systems are useful if you do have an incident, even if it didn't initially catch the activity. It provides valuable forensic information. So if your insurance company does come in and has to pay out a claim, and they go back through and want to know what caused the incident, this data will be crucial. So this is a very important function. So response is around, okay, I've detected that I have an incident. Now, how do I mitigate it? What do I do? I have a ransomware event. I have a message up on my screen. Do I unplug the machine from the wall? Do I go disconnect the internet? Who do I call? Do I call my attorney first? Do I call my insurance company first? Do I need, a professional incident response team? So these are all questions that you do not want to figure out when you have a fire. You don't have to have this, perfected down to every last step. You don't need a flow chart and say, okay, this is exactly how it's going to go, because every incident can be different. So, but you want to have those key pieces of information. You want to have, your legal counsel lined up. You want to have their contact information somewhere outside of your computer systems, because if you can't access any of your systems, you don't want to be trying to figure out how to even get in touch with your professional services. And then this last function is recovery. So, okay, we've isolated, we've mitigated, we've gotten the bad guys out of the system. Now, how do we recover from that? And this is all, you know, especially for large scale incidents, this is how do you, you know, work with your insurance company, restore systems, bring them back in lines. And not only that, make sure that it doesn't happen again. So then you're going to be, you know, looking to see what caused the incident and putting the protections in place. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of instances where businesses will never make it to this phase, and that's a sad truth, is that there's a lot of companies that will never weather a storm of a significant ransomware attack. So, you know, my goal here is to help improve that statistic and make it so that we have a fighting chance of surviving this. Okay, so that's all great, right? So I just went through a whole lot of information there, and that's a lot to chew on. But I wanted to actually give you guys some very impactful, easy to take home things that you can do today that you don't have to read through that NIST framework. So I'm going to talk about a few things that, you know, tools, technologies, and things that we can do that have very significant impact in reducing our risk to these things. So I know we've seen this. This is a very popular thing, but you know, it is one of the best things that you can do is use multi-factor authentication everywhere possible. And if you don't know what multi-factor authentication is, that is, you know, when you log into a website or your computer or your email or anything, and then it sends you a code or sends you a text message. And basically, this says, okay, you gave me the right password, but just to be sure, I'm going to send you this other form of authentication just to make sure it's not somebody that is impersonating you. And now in the past, we've seen this, you know, especially in financial, we've seen it with banks. Most organizations, I think at this point, and I hope at this point, are using it on like their email systems. But, you know, the insurance industry is really driving this point home. And, you know, we're starting to see requirements for cyber policies where they're requiring this on, you know, remote access VPN. So if you VPN into your office to work, they're requiring multi-factor authentication for that. Pretty much anything that's exposed to the outside world. So any websites, anything that's facing the internet, you know, multi-factor should be on that system. And insurance companies I've even seen now are requiring on internal systems as well, especially for administrative accounts. So, you know, this is the number one thing. If you're going to go home or back to your office and you know, work on something, I would start by doing this. Say, you know, with all of our systems that we have, can we implement multi-factor authentication if we don't have it now? Implement a password manager and use random unique passwords of 12 or more characters. I'll briefly cover why this is important. One of the biggest ways that networks and computer systems are compromised are through credential theft. So what that means is, you know, if you have an employee who uses the same password on every single site that they visit and every system that they use, or if they use things that are, you know, I've seen this, you know, firsthand. I bet you right now that there's a large chunk of, you know, our customer base that, you know, hopefully not, that uses a password like Spring 2022. All right. If you're using a password like that, that's one of the first passwords that an attacker is going to guess, and I've seen it many times. So what a password manager does is that it makes it so that every site that you visit and every system that you log into, you can generate a random password that, you know, doesn't mean anything to anyone, and it's long enough that if someone were to compromise that password database that's on, you know, one of these websites that you visit, that they're not going to be able to crack that encrypted password easily. So a password manager will allow you to securely store all of these random passwords and generate them for you, and you don't have to remember them. So it actually makes your life a little bit easier because you're not constantly trying to remember what your password was, and it's making it so that there's no password reuse. Because what happens is once one of those sites that you visit is compromised, Well, the attacker on that site is going to take the password that they learned from that site and try it on all of the other major sites out there, and then they're hoping that people are going to be reusing those passwords. So inventory your hardware. I think I talked about this a little bit, during the NIST part of the discussion, but, knowing what you have, inventory your software, know what applications you use, inventory your network, inventory your data, inventory your people. All of these are very important, because if you don't know what it is you're protecting, you're not going to be able to adequately protect it. Here's another one, inventory your vendors. So a lot of times, a lot of attacks we see coming through vendors. So ask your vendors what they're doing to protect, the information that you're putting in their hands. So if you're using any third-party vendors that have access to your information systems, make sure you do your due diligence and make sure that they have a cyber insurance policy and that they have a incident response plan, that if they have a security incident, that they're required to let you know about that. And you just want to make sure that they're putting the appropriate protections in place to protect your data as well. Research your industry and its threat actors. And I think I mentioned this, but depending on if you're in healthcare, there's usually a different set of threat actors and a different set of tactics used. But you don't want to spray and pray your protections. You want to kind of focus on the largest types of threats that are specific to your industry. Test your backups and keep a copy isolated from your production environment. This is very important. So we've seen time and time again where there's an event and people are paying out hundreds of thousands of dollars, or their insurance is paying out hundreds of thousands of dollars because they didn't have good backups. Now, this doesn't mean that even if you have good backups and you restore your systems, this doesn't mean that you're totally off the hook, because what the threat actors are doing now is they're exfiltrating all of that data that they're encrypting. So if you say, if you go back to the ransomware actor and you're like, look, go pound sand, I have good backups, take your ransomware node somewhere else. We'll say, well, that's fine, but if you don't pay up, we're going to release all of your customers' information out on the dark web, and you're going to be dealing with lawsuits and everything else. So they still have a hook in you, even if you can get your systems back, but it's a step in the right direction. It's better to be in that position than to not have anything. You don't want to be solely depending on the ransomware actor to give up the decryption keys. Train your staff. This is very, very important. That's often the weakest link is someone clicking on something in their email, someone letting someone in that back door. So training around cybersecurity is vital to having a comprehensive security solution. Get yourself cyber insurance policy. I know I kind of beat this one over the head, but this isn't something, when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of dollars of potential liability, this is not something that you want to go without. This would be like driving without a car insurance policy, not having a homeowner's insurance policy. This could be the end of your business if you don't do this the right way. So I want to emphasize, go out and shop this out if you haven't. Check out the CIS controls. Now, the CIS controls are a very practical, it's a very meat and potatoes set of controls. It's very specific. It's around, similar to the list I went over here. These are the specific things that you can put into place to reduce your risk exposure. So I highly recommend that you go check out the CIS security controls. Lastly, seek professional help. If you don't have the expertise or the training, of your internal staff, get help. There's companies out there like ours that can, give advice. We're plenty busy, but we want to see everyone do better around cybersecurity. This isn't something that it's not something you can bring your nephew in who has some experience at home, building PCs. It's not something that they're equipped to handle appropriately. So get help, and don't totally depend on the help. Know what questions to ask them and validate that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. but it's a shared responsibility thing. So with that, I can supply these resources and references that I used throughout the presentation. In summary, this is a very difficult challenge, and it takes a team of people to adequately protect our businesses from these threats that we're facing. But learn the right questions to ask and seek out help, and you'll at least have a fighting chance to survive and thrive in this landscape. So with that, I'll take any questions you guys have. Hopefully I didn't put anyone to sleep, but fire away if you have a question.